The next interview is with Jean Horton.
Okay, my name is Wendy Bennett. We're here today with Jean Horton doing the oral history project on Monday, May 20th, 2013 at the Bayport-Blue Library. Hello, Jean.
Right. Hello, Wendy. Good to be here.
Thank you. What is your full name?
My full name is Jean Horton, and I live in Blue Point, of course, and I'm the local historian.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Brooklyn. I always tell people I was born on Western Long Island, a place called Brooklyn, 1942.
And what towns have you lived in?
I really just lived in the city, Brooklyn, as a child, and then we were summer people out here in Blue Point, and then we moved here permanently in 1948.
Okay, so how did your family come to move here permanently?
My family's had a long connection. I know my grandparents, way back around 1906, spent their honeymoon here. They lived in the city and came out here for their honeymoon. And we were summer people here my parents were summer people here too. So I have no idea what year, back in the 20s maybe, or 30s. And that's how we came to live in Blue Point.
And what high school did you attend?
I went to a high school that's no longer in business.
Oh.
Seton Hall High School in Patchogue. It opened in the 1930s, and it closed around 1974. But it was a very, very good school. It was a wonderful school.
Now, I'm going to go off script here for a minute. What was your earliest memory of Blue Point?
Here in Blue Point, I guess just being in town and seeing different things happening. Like, I remember distinctly the Little League parades back in, I guess, the late 40s, early 50s, right around that time. I was probably about 10 or 12 years old. And we always had a nice Little League parade, as I remember, right down Blue Point Avenue, over on Madison Street, and eventually up to the ball field, which was over by Atlantic Avenue. That's one of my earliest memories of Blue Point. Yeah.
Do you remember your parents talking at all of their time in Blue Point?
I remember where they used to talk about what hotels were here, and where my grandparents used to come out here and stay at a hotel that still exists. They call it Namke Lodge. That was the old name. Today it's the Blue Point Motor Inn on Middle Road and Nelson Avenue in Blue Point. So that was kind of an interesting. Yes, I always kept hearing about the hotels.
And how did you become interested in being the town historian?
Well, it actually happened after the Ursuline Convent in Blue Point burned down. It burned down in 1980. And I knew at one time there was a hotel on the property, but that's when I started to do a lot of research about it. And I wrote an article for the Suffolk County News about the convent and the hotel that was there before. And the article was well done, and that started me at researching all the other hotels that were here in town. That's how I really got into it, sort of through a fire. I hate to say that, but that's about what it was.
Okay, so tell me about the jobs that you have had.
The big job I had, of course, was teaching school. I taught 7th and 8th grade, from 1964 until I retired in 1997. So I spent about 35 years or thereabouts in 7th and 8th grade social studies out in East Moriches. And it was really a wonderful career, wonderful job. I loved it. Yeah, now I have about 750 friends on Facebook, former students. Now we're friends.
Oh, that's great.
But they were great kids, really great kids. It always impresses me when my former students show me photographs of their grandchildren. That is bad.
So, do you remember any significant historical events that affected your family within this community, such as the railroad closing or big storms?
My father was a commuter. He, even after we moved out here, he commuted on the railroad, and it was always handy for him to commute from Blue Point. But then around, I think it was 1980, all train service stopped here in Blue Point and Bayport, same year. And after that, by that time, he was no longer working in the city. He'd retired. But I know it was always handy to have the Blue Point Railroad Station. Very handy. So that was the end of an era. The station opened way back around 1900, and then it closed. The last train stopped here in 1980. Now no trains. Now you have to go to Patchogue, Sayville, or Ronkonkoma.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, was there a train station in Blue Point and Bayport?
There was a train station in both towns.
Okay.
Blue Point had a very pretty Victorian, I wish it was still here. And Bayport Station would have to be described as luxurious. It was beautiful.
Wow.
They had oriental carpets. It would have made a wonderful headquarters for a group like Bayport Heritage. Would have been great. Perhaps if we had historical societies then, like we have now, we could have saved those buildings, but they're gone. The railroad dismantled them.
That's a shame.
Yep, too bad.
Okay,
Yeah.
so summer is a big season in Blue
big.
Point, of course. So do you remember any activities you took part in when you were living here in Blue Point at an early age?
Well, the thing I always remember about the summer in Blue Point, when did summer begin? Summer begins when Flo's opens. Flo's is like a mainstay in the community. I think it's the oldest eating establishment in Blue Point. Whereas over in Bayport, the oldest eating establishment is Grey Horse Tavern. That opened in the 1860s. Flo's opened in 1926, right where it is now down on Middle Road. And that's always, to me, the start of the summer. I know I've been there already this season. They've opened. I've been there 3 times, actually.
So summer has started.
The summer has started, yes, regardless of what the calendar says about the solstice. Summer begins when Flo's opened. That, and I do remember growing up crabbing, going crabbing at the end of the Blue Point Avenue dock. Yeah, it was always a great activity. We would spend hours on the Blue Point Avenue dock crabbing.
Was it crowded?
Yeah, I don't know. I never thought it was that crowded, but I guess it was, yes. Yeah, because you're in your own little world there, you know what I mean? So, but it was fun. It was really always fun. It was fun to be in. Of course, you had the bay for swimming.
Right.
There was a nice beach club right down the end of Blue Point Avenue. And yeah, it was a nice place to grow up. It still is. We have Corey Beach today, as you know.
Right.
That's a magnet. Very nice, really beautiful. Yeah, we're lucky.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about the difference when you were growing up in Blue Point and now in terms of the stores, the locations, the crowds, the people who live here.
Yeah, well, years ago, Blue Point attracted many summer people, which it doesn't attract anymore. I mean, today our population doesn't fluctuate that much. But in the old days, it really did. Hundreds of people came to Bayport, Blue Point, Patchogue, Sayville, thousands of people to stay over and things like that for 2 weeks or whatever. But now, the population here is more stable today. That's what I'd say. Yeah, more stable. Yeah, less tourism. I think the tourism moved more or less east. The Hamptons, the North Fork, places like that. But in the old days, the whole South Shore here of Long Island, from probably Suffolk County, South Shore, Bay Shore, Babylon, Islip, Sayville, Patchogue, they were summer magnets in the old days. And nowadays, they're really not. No, it's more stable today.
Now, why do you think that has changed?
I'd say transportation. The big thing, because now you have the expressway. You can go all the way out to Riverhead and bypass these communities. So I think it was all due to transportation. And even with us back in the old days, transportation was important when the railroad came here. That triggered the summer movement. Summer people coming out here. Many of them didn't own cars. They came out by train. So it was kind of interesting. I wish I had a time machine. I'd like to go back.
Yeah, me too.
I'd go back to about I'd go back 100 years. Back to about 1913.
And why is that?
The trolley was running. The hotels were all thriving. We weren't yet involved in World War I. And you'd get to see Blue Point as it looked way back, 100 years ago, 1913. That would be amazing.
It would, yeah.
The roads weren't paved. You know, they were just paved with oyster shells, clam shells. I know they used to come by with trucks and water the shell roads down because they got so dusty. Montauk Highway at one time was nicknamed the Great White Way because if we went into a drought, all the trees and the foliage up there would be covered in white. The dust from the oyster shells, clam shells. So it's interesting. I'd love to see it.
Now, besides flows and crabbing, what other places stand out in your mind in Blue Point? Any stores?
Yeah, I'd say boating too. Like, the Corey Creek over here? That was always a home for Blue Point boats. And we never owned a boat, but I know boating was very popular. Sailboating and motorboating. Canoes, right off Blue Point here. Very, very popular. Yeah, even in the old days, there were no real motorboats. Back, say, about 1880s, man, they'd have to rely on the wind. That was interesting,
How much everything has changed.
Yeah, it changed a great deal.
So what kind of local events or gatherings do you remember growing up in Blue Point?
Well, the big thing I remember was right next door, the Blue Point Fire Department, every summer would have a bazaar or a carnival of sorts. And they'd have all booths, games of chance, games of skill. And they did it as a fundraiser, but it was a major community event. The Blue Point, and Bayport did the same thing, I believe. They all did something to raise funds during the summer. That's when the people were here.
So it was very much a summer community.
Oh, it was a summer community, yeah. Yeah, a lot of hotels. The hotels were good because they would bring people into town. It was good for businesses, good for the beach. It was wonderful. We'd hire people, too.
Right, yeah,
That
good for
helped.
the economy.
Good for the economy. Although I heard that a lot of the hotels preferred to hire young women as waitresses, but they hired them from colleges upstate. And they brought them here, housed them here. But those young women, waitresses, didn't know any of the local boys. And it was good for them. It was good for the hotel owner because the ladies weren't asking for time off for dates and whatnot. So I don't know if that's all true, but that's what I heard. Yeah.
So what other gathering places were in the community of Blue Point long ago?
Well, let's see. Certainly the churches. They were real gathering. Blue Point. Well, we really had 3 churches in the old days. The earliest one would be the Blue Point Baptist Church, now known as the Blue Point Bible Church. And then the next one to open was the Blue Point Methodist Church. And the Methodist Church was built right where the Salvation Army headquarters is today. And then the most recent church would be 1917. That'd be Our Lady of the Snow, the Catholic Church, right down the street. And in much more recent times, in the 1950s, the Greek Orthodox Church came and built up on the Montauk Highway. And they were always gathering places in the summer. They always had church fairs and concerts and dinners and oyster stew and things like that. It was really, very fire department, church, the Bay orientated. Locally.
Now, were you involved in any particular church?
Yeah, Our Lady of the Snow. I was involved with Our Lady of the Snow Church, and it was always fun. I just remember one pastor we had back then. His name was Father Schutz, Peter Schutz. And that was the first time I saw a dead person. He died in September of 1952. I was 10 years old, and I went to the rectory with my parents and saw him. It was the first time I ever saw a dead person. It was it made a permanent image, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
Yeah. But anyway, minor memory.
Yes. Do you remember any great stories or legends about Blue Point?
Well, you know what happened in Blue Point years ago, all these hotels, we attracted a number of personalities here.
Sure.
And one of them was up at the Anchorage Inn on the corner of Montauk Highway and Kennedy. There was a big hotel there. It was called the Old Anchorage Inn. And the man that ran it, his name was Will Graham. And he was a showbiz personality. And he attracted people out here to visit his place. And among them were Mary Pickford and who else came out? Teddy Roosevelt. And they came out here to visit that place. And the magnet there was the Sphinx, that big, the big Sphinx. Will Graham created that almost as a magnet to his place, a landmark on the Montauk Highway. And yes, it certainly worked. Supposedly, Mae West visited there. I don't even remember Mae West or not. And she offered to buy the Great Sphinx, but of course it wasn't for sale. But that was an interesting place, that's for sure. Yeah, I've done a lot of research on it. Yeah, I remember Mae West once commented, one of her little comments, "I used to be a snowflake, then I drifted." Mae West. She was funny. But anyway.
And she was in Blue Point.
She was here in Blue Point, yes.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. I never saw her, of course. That was before my time,
yes.
but I've heard all about her, so.
Now, many people have asked me why Blue Point is called Blue Point. Can you talk a little bit about the different legends there?
Yeah, Blue Point, where did it get its name? Supposedly, I would say in the late 17th century, about 1690, right in that time period there, supposedly the jut of land that extends out into the bay it was a point of land with a blue haze over it, and they always referred to it as Blue Point. And I know on old maps it's even spelled B-L-E-W, point, Blue Point. But that supposedly is how Blue Point got its name. Now, and back then, of course, the most famous product we had here was the Blue Point oyster.
Yes, of course.
And if you're from Brooklyn, they called it the Blue Point oyster. But anyway, the Blue Point oysters were begun here and became extremely popular around the world. Queen Victoria loved Blue Point oysters. Nowadays, what's our most famous Blue Point thing? Believe it or not, beer. Blue Point beer. It's all over Long Island. And it doesn't really come from Blue Point. The brewery's over there in Patchogue on River Avenue. But they use the name Blue Point, so people do associate it with our little community. But a lot of people do, if they live afar, they get mixed up between Blue Point, Bellport, Belmore, Bayport. It all blends after a while.
It's confusing with all the B's. Yeah.
I usually tell people I live near Sayville or Patchogue. Those they know. And here, Blue Point, Bayport are just nestled in between Patchogue and Sayville. Yes.
Now, do you think many years ago, if you said you lived in Blue Point, people would have more familiarity with it?
They would think right away of oysters and hotels. Yeah. Yeah, many people knew Blue Point just because that. We had at least 10 major hotels here in town.
Wow.
Now there's really just one left running.
And which hotel is that?
Well, in the old days, it had a couple of names. A lot of these hotels changed names. The earliest name I heard for it was the Rendezvous, Club Rendezvous. And I knew it growing up as Namke Lodge. And today it's called the Blue Point Motor Inn. It's right on the corner. It'd be on the northwest corner of Middle Road and Nelson Avenue. It's still there, still running. I think it's more efficiency apartments today. I know one couple has been living there for about 20 years. But it's not really a hotel anymore, but I guess you could stay there over, a period of time, sure. Nice place.
Now, since we are in the library, and this is a library project, of course you don't remember the library starting out. No. But what are your earliest memories of the library?
My earliest memories was the Bennett House. That's where, actually maybe a little before that. I remember the library when it was on the corner of Blue Point Avenue. It was on the southeast corner of Blue Point Avenue and Madison Street, where the dentist office is today. There was a house there, an office. It was Estelle Noble's real estate and insurance office. And she was very good to the library. The library began in 1938 over in the school, and then it made one move up street, and went up to where the Blue Point liquor store is today, and took over the northern part of that building, and stayed there for maybe 2 years. And then Miss Noble offered her office down there. So the library moved down there, and that's my first, I just remembered vaguely in that building. But the building I remember most was the Bennett House. And that stood right on the front lawn of the present library. And it was dark in there, though. It was dark. It was just a private house, and I always remember it was kind of dark. You walked in, and the circulation desk was over to the left, and it was really interesting. I remember two of the ladies there. They were all volunteers in the old days. I don't think any of the people that worked here got paid until maybe the 60s or something.
Wow.
It ran for years just on volunteers. But that was another day and age, of course. Yeah. So
Now, why would you come to the library when you were younger?
really, it was really just books and magazines. Yeah, they didn't really have the programs that we have today. But it was a start. And, even today, the library's logo is a wheelbarrow. And they did go around town, these women, in the 1938 collecting books and from residents and summer people. And that was the start of our original library. They didn't buy any books. They depended on donated books. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
I think the library bought their first book around 1940, maybe. They actually bought a book and then started after that buying books. But prior to that, it was all done on donations. Totally amazing. Yeah. But it was a good start. Yeah.
Now, have you been active in any other local businesses or organizations?
Let's see, not in business, no. Organization, just the Chamber of Commerce. I'm still active in the Chamber. Bayport-Blue Point Chamber, a great group. And they have about 200 members. And we meet actually here in the library twice a year. Yeah, the library is a member of the Chamber. And we meet in the meeting room right next door. Just wonderful. Yeah, that would be my biggest... Yeah, that'd be my main organization, I'd say, the Chamber.
So we've talked a little bit about the changes in the community, but what's the biggest change that you've seen in this community?
Well, probably the biggest change, in the old days, everybody knew everybody. Now, you don't know everybody as such. Yeah, it's different. There are more people here today. But I know I just met neighbors of mine. They live a couple of houses away. I just met them for like the first time.
Wow.
And it's sort of too bad in a way, but we're getting to know one another. But
It's good.
yeah, it is good. But at one time, you knew everybody in town. Now that's sort of changed today. The other thing that's changed is more traffic.
Yeah.
Like in the old days, each house had one car. That was about it. And Dad used the car for work. Now, look at how many cars are associated with each house. The kids have cars, the mom, the dad, they all have cars. It's a big change. More traffic, more people.
Oh, I'm sure Blue
Yes.
Point Avenue is very different.
Yeah. Very different, very different.
And with that, what do you miss the most about
What do
the
you
way it
miss
used
the
to
most? I don't know. Today is pretty good. I guess just the interaction between people. But, yeah, I would say... I don't know. I know a lot of people in town, and it's still a very friendly place, a nice place to live, a nice place to grow up. I'm also active in the cemetery, behind us, of course. I should have said that. The Blue Point Cemetery.
be. And how long have you been involved with
I've been
that?
involved with the cemetery for about 15 years, I'd say. I undertook a great project. I don't know if you know about it, but I photographed every headstone, every footstone, and then I arranged them in 4 volumes of books. Big books, loose-leaf books, in alphabetical order.
Oh, wow.
And then under each photograph, I researched and found many of their obituaries. So I have not all, I have a lot of obituaries and photographs. And I jokingly tell people that I feel as if I know more dead people in Blue Point than I know alive, and it's true. But it's a really nice cemetery back there, very nice, very well run.
What was your favorite part of cataloging all those headstones?
Finding out how it's absolutely true that behind each headstone there's a story. And the stories behind those headstones, I did 2 programs here at the library last year, I think, called Who We Were. And up on the screen, I put a picture of the gravestone, and then I told the audience who was that person. And we have some fascinating people buried back there, including Florence Kimball, the founder of Flo's stand down there. And she died in 1950. She's buried back there. We also have, of course, a Nobel Prize winner, Anna Davis's husband. And he was a great man, Ray Davis. And not many cemeteries have a Nobel Prize winner, believe me. So we're honored in that respect. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Well, we're about done
Good.
with our time.
I know. It goes so fast.
I know. Is there anything else that we didn't get to that you'd like to talk about Blue Point?
Well, I think Blue Point's a beautiful community. I mean, when you drive around and look at the homes, the businesses, the business district here, the bay is beautiful. And, it's just a lovely, lovely place in which to live and in which to grow up. I love Blue Point. Yeah, and Bayport. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jean.
You're more than welcome. It was a pleasure and an honor.
This marks the end of the interview with Jean Horton.